So we're almost ready, I think.
Okay, I looked at the little red light came on.
Ross is doing one more thing, so we'll make sure we get that squared away.
Are they setting up the recording now?
Yeah, we're recording.
Oh,
Should be going. He said the blue light wouldn't come on, but the little red light is on.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's what they said would happen.
Hi.
Okay.
Good.
That's a secret covert recording because we always figured that it's got to have the blue light on or it's not happening, so beware.
yeah.
If the red light's on and the blue light's not, you're still getting recorded.
Hopefully we don't have to do this all again in 2 more hours.
Okay, yeah. All right, with that, we're going to go ahead and open up our Public Safety Task Force meeting. Today's meeting is actually our last one that we will have in the sense of formulating with our assistance of Sarah Sullivan as to what some of our next steps are going to be. And Mike, did you want to kind of go over the preview of what we're going to be doing, just for we've set a record, or?
Yeah, sure. So, today we're going to update the task force on some of the work that we've been doing with the Justice Reinvestment Grants, the work that we've done with Vera. Sarah Sullivan's going to kind of preview what the final report from Vera will be, with some kind of, highlighting successes, looking at some places where we can improve, and then asking some questions about what the future holds. So we'll go through that. The CJC has a couple new websites and dashboards that we'd like to show off today. But we're hoping for, at the end, to kind of have a more, a bigger discussion among the task force members here about where we go in the future, because as probably you all realize, this task force sunsets on January 1, 2017. We have a report that we have to submit to the legislature in the fall, and so we kind of have to decide where we go from here and how to react to that. So that's kind of the overview.
All right, and so what we're going to do, starting off, we have our welcomes and introductions, and looks like Sheriff Myers is taking off to do other things. We got you on record. He's here, though. So why don't we, I guess, just go through and start to my left, and if everyone can just introduce, since we don't have nameplates, we can kind of set a record who's here from the task force, and we'll see what members we have on the phone after that.
Sure. John Teague, City of Kaiser Chief of Police for the Oregon Association Chiefs of Police.
Thanks, John.
Scott Taylor, Multnomah County Department of Community Justice, representing the Oregon Association of Community Corrections Directors.
Mike Schmidt, Executive Director of the Criminal Justice Commission.
Floyd Brzezinski, State Senator, District 4, parts of Lane and Douglas County.
Jennifer Williamson, House District 36, Portland.
Lane Borg, Executive Director of Metropolitan Public Defenders for Oregon Criminal Defense Lawyers Association.
Jay Dixon, Benton County Commissioner, representing the Association of Oregon Counties.
All right, thank you. And we also have Jason Myers, who's here representing the Oregon Sheriff's Association, who stepped out to take a phone call. And on the line, I know we have Representative Olson. Andy, why don't you go ahead and give us a A-OK?
Andy Olson from House District 15, Albany.
And who else do we have on the phone? Okay, someone's not telling, because we know the light tells us there's someone else out there. We'll be watching.
I think
All
we had
right.
some CJC staff members
Oh.
Okay.
Phone,
Yeah.
sitting there quietly.
listening
All right.
in.
Okay, well, that sounds great. So, Ross, why don't you go ahead and get us started off regarding your update?
Okay, thank you very much. Ross Caldwell with the Criminal Justice Commission. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the prison use update. This is kind of a response to the big November 10th convening of counties meeting. We set the prison intake reduction goal, so we're just going to look at how we're doing 1 month into that. So we'll start off with our big population slide, which you're all very familiar with. The Deer Ridge line is the dotted line here. The red solid line is Junction City. The green line is where we were in 2013. The black is where we've gone so far. And then our old forecast from April 2015 is orange, and then our new most recent forecast from October is in blue. So just as kind of a reminder, which I'm sure you all don't need, we were going to go into Deer Ridge very early this year. I need to have expanded capacity, and then we were going to be looking at this next set of slides here. we would need to have Junction City built and online in 2024. So that's the blue line there, where it crosses the higher of the red lines. So the significance, obviously, of 2024 is it would take 5 years to build this, which means we would have to find the money in the next big session, which is kind of what spurred all the November 10th convening of the counties and the intake reduction goal. So this next set of slides is just the same thing for the female population. It jumps around quite a bit more. The new forecast for the female population is obviously not quite as bad in the long run, but it does go over the OSP minimum line very quickly. So the intake reduction goal. So this was broken down by RIC region, so the 4 different RIC regions in the state. And the overall goal is 25 less male intakes per month beginning in December. And for females, it's 6 less intakes also beginning in beginning in December. So how that breaks down region per region, for the Central Eastern region, it would be 3 fewer male intakes per month and 1 less female. The Northwest Coastal region would be the same, 3 fewer male and 1 less female. And then the Southwest region is 4 fewer male and 1 less female. And then for the Metro region, which is 61% of the total prison use, it's 15 fewer male intakes per month and 3 fewer female intakes. So broken down region by region, these are pretty small numbers, which is why we thought this is hopefully an achievable goal. And then just to map out where that would put us in terms of the 2 different prison populations, male and female, with our 2 respective Junction City and Deer Ridge lines. So the October forecast is in blue, and then if we actually meet these goals, the green line is what that would drop us down to. So we wouldn't be having to use expanded number of beds in Deer Ridge until 2020, and we would push Junction City out of the 10-year forecast. And then for the female population, we would have to open up OSP minimum sometime late 2025, it looks like, if we're able to meet our goal of 6 fewer female intakes per month. So, not to jump ahead to that. So the way that we're going to kind of show you, you've got a handout in front of you. It's this one. It's got our kind of blue and yellow seal. Should be the first one under your agenda there. And that has region by region how we met the goals. And then we also wanted to show you the way that counties can look at this without having to wait for CJC to come around and do a RIC meeting. We now have dashboards for prison intakes up on our website. So if you're following along on the phone, if you go to the dashboards, the Measure 57 goals dashboard, which is kind of in the gray band across the top, it's towards the right. That's the one we're going to be looking at first. So looking at this chart, the blue band across the top is where the goal is. Well, it's going to reset itself here for a second, I think. So within that blue band, you see that little gray line. That's the actual goal for each region. And then below that, you have month by month how we did in respect to the with respect to the goal. So the blue band around the gray line is just plus or minus 10%. So you can filter this by year. Obviously, the goal didn't come into effect until December of 2015, so we'll leave this on 2015. You can filter it for male or female population, so we'll just look at male population first. And then you can also filter it by region. And then below you can filter it by county, but we'll start with just by region. All these goals were set regionally. There was no goal for any county to reduce a certain amount of intakes, but each was by region. So if you look at the metro region, the big 5 counties, which is 61% of the prison usage, we are actually under the goal for December. We were also under for November, but the goal didn't exist then, so that is certainly helpful. But looking at it just as the goal going forward, we were under for December. If you look at the Southwest region, they were a little bit above the goal in December. The Northwest Coastal region was quite a bit above the goal. And then the Central Eastern region was significantly below. So, in context, this is only 1 month. This is not necessarily a trend yet or anything like that, but This is what's happened in the time since we had the big November 10th meeting and as we've been able to look at this. So if you again, if you want to look at this county by county to see, you can look at the gray line here, which represents all the metro county. And then you can filter this by, say you wanted to look at Lane County. The blue line within the gray is how much of that prison use was attributed to Lane County. And then you can look at that for each of the different counties. And then below here, you're able to look at different crime types and how the different crime types, the goals are made up of only the Measure 57 property, drug, and driving crimes. But you can look at those individually on this graph below, and that can be filtered as well. And this graph also lets you look at other types of prison. So if you wanted to look at person crime intakes for the month of December or for all the months in the last year in Multnomah County and the metro region, you could do that. And you'll just notice that when you look at person crimes, this goal across the top disappears because the goal for intake reduction doesn't have anything to do with person crimes or sex crimes or anything like that. It's purely the Measure 57 property, drug, and driving crimes, which is what most of the justice reinvestment programs deal with. And so I know we have a lot of things on the agenda today. We won't take a ton of time to look at the dashboards, but would encourage you to, I know a lot of you have looked at them already, had a chance to play around with them, but we can look at intakes by population, which is another graph on here. And this can be scaled down for population. So if you wanted to look at just small population counties, you can scale down and look at that. And again, this can be filtered throughout all the different regions, through different counties, and you can look at male or female offenders. This allows you to look at individual counties and to compare them to each other. And then we also have prison intake dashboards, which allow you to compare regions to each other. So most all we have on the dashboard so far is purely intakes. So we're working on length of stay and total prison use and things like that. So soon we'll be able to have all the different information that we give out during the RIC meetings. Counties will be able to go to our website and look at this immediately, look at how they're doing month by month and see where they are in respect to the goals, how they're using prison. And at some point we'll have this broken down into different crime types. So you could look at specifically stolen car cases or identity theft or something you have a problem with. I know we've got a lot of feedback that people are very interested in seeing how heroin crime, for instance, is happening kind of on a month-by-month basis because heroin's come back in a big way and meth is still around. So this is all intakes with the exception of this first dashboard here. And this dashboard is just about uniform crime reports. So this allows you to look at reported crime up until 2014. We don't have the 2015 data yet. I think the deadline for law enforcement agencies to get that information into OSP is March 1st, I believe. And then that'll all be collated and we'll be able to have uniform crime data county by county as well as region by region. So this is all kind of part of our overall effort to just better inform the discussion about prison use. At some point we want to have more data on what's kind of coming in at the front end. As opposed to just what is going to prison versus probation. Right now, the only thing we have is this uniform crime report to that end, but we're working on getting more information on that. Any questions about any of that?
I just want to say I'm very impressed. It makes it very simple to figure out if we're on target and what we're doing and who else we need to talk to. So it's
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, very impressive. John?
Yeah, so JRI programming is not reflected in these numbers yet, right? Because it's...
Not yet. Well, you know, Multnomah County's program's been up and running for a long time,
Right.
so that's reflected. But the counties that are getting their programs up and running now, I think are starting to just take effect. A lot of them got their money in December, so they probably just started hiring, you know, additional POs or buying more treatment beds or whatever they're spending their money on recently. So it's kind of phasing in, but it's not all taken effect yet.
And it's certainly not reflected in the predictions, forecasts.
No, I think that what we heard was that maybe some of Multnomah County's program would be reflected just because it's been underway for a while and it's made a change, but it is not reflected in the forecast. Justice reinvestment programs are not in the forecast.
So I guess my question is, how would you reflect the impact of GRI programming, say, 3 years from now? There really isn't a mechanism to do that apart from just the raw numbers, right?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we've tried to do is we've taken the kind of the baseline per county, which I don't have the graphs on that year, but we took a 3-year average of prison intakes for the last 3 years for Measure 57 property, drug, and driving crimes, and we kind of averaged it out because we wanted counties to be able to see how they were using prison compared to what they'd done in the past. But we didn't want to just say, let's compare this year to last year, because maybe last year you had a really high year. Or, if you continue to supervise people locally, at some point you'll probably have kind of picked all the low-hanging fruit. So we can't expect counties to continue to go down and down and down and down forever with the same programs. So we have that 3-year baseline, and that's something that we present during the RIC meetings. But other than that, we kind of have to look at the raw numbers, see what percentage of people get probation versus prison, see how many revocations we have. Yeah, that's kind of where we're at so far. We definitely welcome suggestions, though.
Yeah.
And Chief, one of the other ways that we're doing now, as Director Taylor is well aware, is we're asking the counties for how the money's being used and outcomes, and we're in that conversation right now about what do we measure, how do we measure it. But one of the things that we're asking is how much less prison did you use because of these programs. And it's not an easy exact science, but so we're trying to figure out how can we get that estimate from the counties directly. And some counties are already doing it. Multnomah County's already done that, where they've said, you're in our Justice Reinvestment Program, you would have had this much prison, so they're keeping track. Other counties are doing that. Yamhill is doing that, and probably a few more. But we're starting to try to track that in a uniform way across all the counties, so we can at least get their opinion of how much prison they're saving because of the investments. So it'll be both ways, both looking at the data overall and then asking the county specifically.
And you guys know this, I'm going to say it anyway. It's important because I think Sarah's going to speak to this shortly. I mean, in the not too far distant future, the impacts of JRI are going to be lost if we don't somehow keep this conversation in front of us. So how to capture that, I have no idea. And I'm really interested to see.
Yeah, and as you said, that's kind of the big topic of today's meeting. We wanted to show the work we've done so far, show what has happened since the big November 10th meeting. I mean, we've only got a month of data since then, but what is the future going to look like? How's this going to be sustainable?
Yeah.
I think we are in some entertaining conversations about how much data we can collect and send, and it's very dispersed, at least for community corrections around the state, what ability they have. But I think if we can find a couple key outcomes or measures that we think as a system make a difference, we could do a job of collecting that. It's just trying to identify, well, which one really, is it rearrests, is it reconvictions, is it all those things, and we have quite a few entertaining debates around that.
We do, don't we? All right, any other questions for Ross? Ross, thank you very much. It's very informative, and it's actually, as you've heard the comments, really gives us a transparency and user-friendly for the flexibility to get information and really hone in on specific regions or individual counties and specifics within that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and we should have more to come. Thank you.
Right. So our next presentation is going to be coming from Jeremiah and Kelly on short-term transitional leave. Why don't y'all come on up?
Well, Chair Przansky, members of the task force, for the record, my name is Jeremiah Stromberg. I'm the Assistant Director of Community Corrections for the Department of Corrections. And Kelly Officer from the CJC and I want to take a few minutes to discuss the current success of the TransLeave program, a recent recidivism study that we have completed on one-year recidivism rates for the first approximately 1,000 inmates who released to the program. And then at your request from the last meeting, show you the impact to DOC beds should the program be expanded beyond a 90-day program. So we'll jump right into the overall numbers. As you can see, we have released 2,505 inmates to short-term transitional leave since December of 2013. So we have 2 years of data now. We're averaging about 100 inmates a month going out onto trans leave. That represents about 50% of the statutorily eligible population that releases each month. Again, the other 50% primarily are not going out on trans leave due to either conduct within our institutions, failure to complete their programming, or maybe they're still in an active program and we don't want to remove them from that program, or they have other holds that prevent them from going out into the community. And overall, that also represents about 25% of those that release every month. We have approximately 400 releases every month back to the community. So the good news about this is trans leave continues to hit the projected benchmarks and the forecasts from the earliest days of 3194 and continues to meet the bed impact that we had hoped that this program would provide. This chart shows you that when the program first began, most of our inmates were still under a 30-day transitional leave program. Only those sentenced on or after October 1st of 2013 were eligible for 90 days. And so the red bar indicates those that are eligible for 90 days, and as you can see, we don't have very many 30-dayers left in the program. So what this means is, as time has gone on, not only do we have more inmates out in the community, but for a longer length of stay under the trans leave program, and that will certainly be important as we talk here in a few minutes about the success and the failures of the program thus far. So some demographic information. Women make up 9% of the overall DOC population, and they are making up 17% of the trans leave population. So again, more women are eligible out of our facilities. Less of them have Measure 11 offenses or other offenses that would not qualify them for release. Overall, less detainers and holds that would prevent their release. And overall, more positive behavior and treatment completion and programming that also makes them eligible internally. We are also tracking, we don't have the statistics today for you. We may talk a little bit during the recidivism study, but we are tracking also by race and crime types so that we can continue to look at both the objective and subjective decision making that goes into how we utilize the program. And I can share with you that overall we're seeing an equity in the usage of trans leave as it relates to the overall DOC population when we do look at it by race. And this has this is the breakdown by crime type. This has been consistent from the start. We haven't seen fluctuation over the 2 years. It's pretty close to a 30-30-30 breakdown of both property, person, and statutory offenses, as there are crimes in all three of those categories that are eligible for trans leave. So this has continued to maintain as a steady trend through the program. Now getting to how folks are doing while actually on trans leave. So this pie chart shows you the successful completions and the failures within the 90-day program. Failure in this case is defined as a return to DOC while still in the trans leave program. This could be for either committing a new crime, or it could be for a series of technical violations, failure to participate, going out on warrant status, continued drug use, and as parole officers attempt to utilize all of the interventions available to them, there comes a point when a person is no longer being successful, and for public safety reasons, it's time to return them to DOC. The good news is, of those close to 2,500 that we have released, only 114 have failed and been returned to the Department of Corrections, representing 5%. I gave you a similar presentation in October of 2014. At that time, 3.5% had failed and returned to DOC, and that was based on the first 1,000 inmates that had released to the program. So we've seen a 1.5% uptick in returns to DOC, again, but we've seen 1,500 more inmates go out for a longer period of stay. So again, highly successful as far as how these inmates are performing on trans leave, and it certainly speaks highly to the programs, Chief Teague, that you were referring to, and the system and structure that community corrections and the counties have put into place to manage this population upon release. For instance, nobody goes out on trans leave without a place to stay. So a parole officer has determined that this is a structured, safe environment for them to return to. And so right from there, they get an advantage that, unfortunately, many times we have to release inmates that the county has not been able to secure a permanent or safe housing plan for. Mr. Taylor.
As you know, I'm highly supportive of this program, and I just wonder, as we go down and do those counts and the distribution, I don't get to see very often how many of the reduction, what percentage of that reduction in prison bed usage is because of the short-term transitional leave. Is it 5%, 20%? So as we're trying to make recommendations for enhancing things that are working, I don't know how big this is. I know in the early days it carried most of the change while we waited for all the rest of the law to come into effect and stuff. So for the first 12 months, most of the reduction was short-term transitional leave. But in today's world, so as you folks work on that, particularly given the success of it, that would be good for all of us to know it affects this much of the reduction.
And we can break that data out and provide that. I will tell you, and unless one of my staff tells me differently, on any given day we have between 200 and 250 inmates on transitional leave in the community. So just for context, if we shut down trans leave today, within 90 days, DOC's prison population would spike by more than 200 inmates. And so when you think about the immediate day-to-day effect, especially as we talk about riding very closely to those Deer Ridge lines and the OSP minimum line, it has made a significant impact in us not having to utilize additional DOC resource to house them.
And I wasn't aware of the female-male difference, particularly since the women's prison is the one at the tightest point.
I believe in the last session we would have opened a female facility had it not been for transitional leave, given the number of female inmates who are currently out on the program. Yes.
Jeremiah, I have a question for you. Now, so getting to this 5%, and I'm generally been aware of in previous conferences I've gone to that talks about how recidivism or failure and supervision is not, it's not just a linear happening on, many of them happen early, close to your release date. And I don't know if in comparing this, have you been able to compare this group with people who weren't getting out on short-term trans leave and having some kind of recidivating or failure event within 90 days? I mean, are you comparing that? Does that make, I'm not sure if
What we are going to share with you in a little bit is how they did in their first 365 days.
Right.
And so we haven't pared it down to the first 90, but we do have some data that comes in close to that. But you are absolutely right. The first 180 days has typically been seen as the most critical period of time, the time when we apply the most intensive supervision to truly determine risk need, when relapse and other influences, antisocial influences are most prevalent to take hold again. So it is a very critical period. We may be able to pare down further, but I think you'll be impressed with some of the data we show you in a few minutes.
All right. One of the things I'd like to call out is on the failure, if you could break that down for us. I know there's 114. How many were based on technical versus new crime? That would be important. And I understand that out in the field, the probation officers or pro-supervision officers are utilizing their structured sanctions. And I'm wondering if there's some type of uniformity that's been given as to how many technicals need to occur, or are there subsets within the technicals that could be considered more detrimental as to that population, what's triggering them coming back?
Yeah, and so, Chair Przansky, to your first question, absolutely we can break out new crime versus technical. And then I'll just share with you briefly, within the Department of Corrections, within my role, I act as the supervisory authority of these cases. So I'm a one-person parole board, if you will. So counties make recommendations as to how they want to respond to violations of behavior. I make a final decision as to either support their recommendation, electronic monitoring, 3 days in jail, or a return to DOC. I make a determination if I believe that to be appropriate. We staff it with the county, and then make a final decision as to whether or not to bring them back to the department. Our override rate of the county's decision-making is very minimal. In most cases, they have either substantiated, we've attempted to address these behaviors multiple times, they're not responding, please take them back, and we do so. Other times where we encourage the county, do you have some other local resources you could implement to attempt to change this behavior? And so that's been the current process that we've utilized.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jeremiah, if I might.
Yes.
The senator's question kind of brought up what I was going to ask as well, and that is, so in the successful completion group, as I understand it, the probation officer has the ability to impose intermediate sanctions as opposed to put them in the failed group where they go back to DOC. So do we know what the impact on the local jails are? In other words, of the successful completion group, say 50% got 4 days in jail. I mean, is there a way to calculate how much local jail time is used to facilitate that transitional program?
My next 2 slides will probably answer most of your questions, and if you have further detail after that, we can certainly get it for you. So in fact, Kelly, if we can move to the next one. What we have found that during the trans-leave period, 2,083 inmates did not receive a jail sanction during their trans-leave period, and 195 jail sanctions were administered. In fact, for those jail sanctions administered, there are some folks who are counted in there multiple times where they may have received an initial jail sanction early on and then another one later on during their trans leave. So it's not 195 individual offenders. It's a number slightly smaller than that. So what we've seen is jail is being used as an appropriate intervention and sanction, along with all other intermediate sanctions available within the county, again, from electronic monitoring to day reporting centers, increased reporting, reprimands, all of the resources that Community Corrections utilizes. And Kelly, if you go to the next graph, and I think this answers your question, this program to date has saved 125,000 prison bed days, and it has utilized just over 3,000 jail bed days in the local community. And so what we are seeing is that it's not a significant burden or merely a shuffling of DOC inmates into county jails to house them for their final 90 days. That jail is only being utilized as short, swift, immediate responses to behaviors that warrant a jail stay, and that while this is an additional 3,000 beds that need to be filled by the sheriffs, that is managed within JRI funding and their community corrections agreements and local control reimbursements to manage this population within their jails.
Thank you.
And that is the last graph that we have in regards to the success during the program. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Officer, who's going to talk about the longer-term recidivism.
Chair, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm just curious. So if somebody from Portland commits a crime in Polk County, for example, he gets released back to Polk County. Correct, right?
You are released to your county of residence.
Okay, got that. 'Cause I was thinking it'd be so much easier to do trans leave where he has some history, like
The default by statute is your county of residence. The parole board can determine another county either based on resources, victim safety, or any other factors they wish to consider. And we usually do that in concert with the residence county and with the county that, say, the inmate would like to go to determine where is the best releasing spot.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for this part? Kelly?
Thank you. My name is Kelly Officer. I'm a research analyst at the Criminal Justice Commission, and I wanted to share with you a recidivism analysis that we've done for the short-term trans leave population. These are preliminary results of this work that we've done. The report will be ready very soon, and so we'll have a final report to share with all of you, but we wanted to share the results of the analysis today. So we looked at those that were released to short-term trans leave from December 2013 to October 2014, and so that window gave us an opportunity to look at one-year recidivism rates of that population. So it gave us kind of a longer-term window to see those recidivism outcomes. And then we compared those to releases that did not receive short-term trans leave, but that were statutorily eligible for the program. So, excuse me, like Jeremiah stated, a person can be statutorily eligible for short-term trans leave, but not receive the program due to behavior or program failure with institution, or inadequate housing in the community, or some kind of detainer or hold that's open for that individual. So we compared these two populations and their recidivism rates, but they are inherently different. The short-term trans leave group qualified for the program and received it and participated in that, and then the other group was statutorily eligible but did not receive it. And so there are a lot of different reasons as to why that could be. So these are two very different groups, but we just would like to show you what their one-year recidivism rates are in the community for that. So here's what that looks like. So the orange line are those that were released to short-term trans leave. So that's 1,033 individuals. And then the blue bars are those that were statutorily eligible but did not receive the short-term transitional leave. So you can see that those released to short-term transitional leave do have lower recidivism rates 1 year in the community. This is the recidivism definition that matches what's in House Bill 3194. So for any new arrest within 1 year, those that didn't receive short-term trans leave have a 30% new arrest rate, and then those that did receive the short-term trans leave program are at 27%. For a new misdemeanor or felony conviction, those that don't receive trans leave are close to 20%, and then those that did are at 16.7%. And then for incarceration, so to be reincarcerated for a new felony crime, those that did not receive short-term trans leave are at 9%, and those that did receive the program are at 6.7%. So this shows that those that receive short-term trans leave have a lower recidivism rate than those that did not but were statutorily eligible to receive it. Now, these two groups are very different. For the reasons that they participated in the program versus not. We also saw differences across these two groups in some demographic factors, age, gender, crime type. And so for the data that we had available for those demographic factors, we did some work to find a match. So for those that received the short-term trans leave, we tried to find a twin in the non-short-term trans leave group for these two groups. So out of the 1,033 short-term trans leave releases, we found 983 matches. So that was a pretty good match when we look at that statistically. And then we matched on gender, race, age, risk to recidivate, and the crime type. So after doing this matching, we looked at these recidivism rates. Now, the two groups are still very different in that one group received trans leave and one group didn't for those myriad of reasons. But when we did that matching, the recidivism rates were, again, fairly similar as the previous group. So these are the two, comparing across the two with 983 in each group. And again, the short-term trans leave group shows a lower recidivism rate than those that did not receive the program. So we're going to work on the report and have this finalized to share. And I think there are questions.
So I should probably know this, having been through many of these meetings. But when you go out on short-term trans leave, what are the requirements beyond housing versus the other group who were released in the regular course? And what are their requirements? Because I'm wondering if what we require in short-term trans leave is working out to be a more supportive system, and that we're seeing other factors that are in the trans leave system that make people more successful.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Do you want to take that one?
To begin with, generally, Representative Williamson, there are no differences in the supervision. Mm-hmm. So the county still has full discretion to assess and determine what level of intensive supervision or lack thereof they wish to apply to this particular population. So we're not treating them differently. They're not treated differently merely because they still have the inmate moniker attached to them, with the exception, as you pointed out, that they cannot leave without having some level of structured housing available. I also just anecdotally, in my experience working with the counties on this, they do screen these cases fairly strictly. We staff a lot of cases just on prior criminal behavior, and so I do know that counties are being very thoughtful in how they're going to supervise these cases. These inmates are being seen on reach-ins and being called by parole officers, but so are the match groups in many of those cases also. So there's not a lot of difference, and I would actually, if Multnomah County is doing something dramatically different with the populations.
No, I think that this just reinforces the idea that these folks are people who have actually made a shift, and they're programming in the institution. We're sorting in some ways. Right. So we'll acknowledge we're taking the people that actually want to get on with life, are qualifying and getting out night. So that incentive of getting out, the requirement of going through, we are sorting in some ways who are getting 90 days earlier, and they have a greater incentive to stick with it. And we do reach in and do stuff, but we can also use that earlier in the process about you want to get out earlier.
Right.
Each county adjusts a little bit to this population, but I don't think we may give them even tighter rein in intolerance.
Right.
We may have a shorter tolerance fuse on behavior. And so these numbers were very, very exciting to us, that once again that risk and that sorting is demonstrating these folks are helping us figure out who can we offer these to. So I think they kind of earn their way out, and they are demonstrating it's a good sort.
So, Chair, Kelly, I guess in looking at this, and I'm going to say this because I love these numbers from my position coming out in terms of what Scott was just saying and justifying the usefulness of it. I can sort of hear my friend Steve Dole saying, okay, wait a minute. Because of this very sorting thing, would it be possible in looking at these numbers on these twins, or maybe they already did it, to take out the people that were behavioral problems, looking just at the people who, because of a hold from another county or something that was beyond their control, maybe indicative of the behavior prior to entering the institution? Because it seems to me that would give us a little more bulletproof comparison, because people are going to be able to say, hey, yeah, the blue bar is the people that were not ready to do anything and they were engaging in fights in the institution, and that was, of course you're going to see it up higher that way. But it seems that if you looked at those people that were just excluded for external reasons, nothing to do with their current behavior, you might be able to say that's a, let's look at those. But
I just, because we were strong supporters of this particular, I think the other thing for me is it demonstrates that we can bring those people, we can bring a group of people out of prison earlier with no increased safety risk. So whoever they are, however they're sorting, the power of this is still strong, that we're doing some job of sorting who has had enough time. Right. And when you do the cost comparison, I have to say this, when you do the cost comparison, we're a heck of a lot cheaper doing this every day.
John first, and then Mike.
I must be missing a bigger picture. I would expect the short-term trans leave rate of recidivism to be substantially less than the non-short-term trans leave. I'm only seeing 3% difference there. Am I missing something?
No, you're not missing something. Those are the recidivism rates that we're seeing with that. We actually, for the conviction and the incarceration differences, we kind of have these two asterisks there, and we're working on this for the final report. So we did a statistical test to compare the differences there between those. So is the difference from 20% down to 16.4%? Is that a significant difference? Is that statistically significant? And so we can do a statistical test to help us figure that out. So on the conviction and incarceration population side, we see that, yes, that is a significant difference. So we wouldn't expect to see those differences by chance that we're seeing in the conviction and incarceration lines. We didn't get to that level on the new arrest outcome. And so with that statistical test, we can see, okay, yes, there is a significant difference here with this population. Now, it's not half, right? So we're not seeing anything quite that dramatic, but we do see that significant difference in the outcomes there that we've seen.
And back to
Yeah.
Lane's question, it did raise for us the exact question you asked. And so I believe Kelly's working with DOC's research department to parcel out who was administratively denied, detainer, some other reason, maybe we just forgot that they were eligible, versus those that it was a behavior issue, versus those it was a program failure, so that we can see, do we see dramatic differences when we break out some of those other populations?
I want to also say, I think that sometimes we live under an illusion that that prison moment changes all behavior. And I think what this reinforces is the people we send to prison that come out still have the issues they had. The treatment did not change everybody and cure them all. And so it's not they're fixed when they come out of prison. They've just spent some time away. Most of the fixing happens in the community, and so either before or after. And I think we need to at least talk about the myth that I keep hearing, that if you go to prison, you're cured. We do not see that in any long-term watch. So I just wanted to say that out loud for the...
All right, any other comments at this point? Okay.
Okay, so I have another area to share with you. This is the estimated bed savings for expanding the short-term trans leave program to 120 days, 150 days, or 180 days. And so you do have a handout in your packet with all of the details of this analysis that was done, that was requested of the CJC at the last task force meeting. So we'll quickly go over this bed savings as well for the program expansion. So these estimates assume that this would apply to sentences imposed on or after March 1st, 2016. And we're also assuming that about 100 inmates a month would receive short-term trans leave. We're assuming that the short-term trans leave program would work as it's currently working. So about 100 inmates a month would receive the program. And then instead of receiving a maximum of 90 days of trans leave, we're assuming a maximum of 120 days, 150 days, or 180 days. And since we've just a couple years ago seen how the program phased in for the new 90-day rule, we can use that same timing of how that phased in to apply it to the new 120, 150, and 180. So we assumed the March 1st date for these estimates. And this graph here shows the bed savings for each of those. So the savings do phase in over time because those savings will come at the end of the sentence for the person. And then for the 120-day, it will kind of reach its max at about 100 beds. We're assuming we're estimating the savings in addition to the current 90 days. The 150-day option, the bed savings will max close to about 200 beds, and then the 180 days will reach the 300 beds there for those estimates. From the data analysis side of things, it was really nice to see how the implementation of the 90-day program worked, and then apply it to this scenario. Since we've just gone through this, we can feel fairly certain that yes, 100 inmates will still receive trans leave, and it will still work in the same way. It will just be that additional time in the program. So we took these savings and subtracted those from the October 2015 forecast, and so that is this graph here with lots of lines. But this is, I'm sure, very familiar to all of you. So we have the Deer Ridge line there, and then also the Junction City line, and then the blue line is the October 2015 forecast. So you can see that does go above that Deer Ridge threshold in early 2016, which is we've been through that a lot with the November meeting with the counties. So assuming that additional permanent beds can be avoided in 2016 with the 120-day expansion, that would delay reaching that Deer Ridge line until June of 2018 with the 120-day program expansion. And then with the 150-day expansion, that's the orange line there, you can see that would push out Deer Ridge until July of 2019. And then with the 180-day program expansion, that would push out Deer Ridge until April of 2021. So those three lines show, with the assumptions of the April 2015 forecast, show the population with those savings from the program expansion. The October 2015 forecast also shows the need for Deer Ridge in 2024. So with the 120 days, that would push Deer Ridge out to 2025. And then with the 150 and 180 days, Junction City, that would push Junction City out of the 10-year forecast window as well for the longer-term impact of Junction City. And that's what we have to show you for that. So we'll take any questions on this.
All right, I got Scott first.
I just want to make sure I love the chart, but I just want to make sure the assumption you built it on from the earlier chart that showed the counties reducing, not the short, but the original chart where we showed the counties also dropping their
The intakes.
commitment rates.
Right.
Which one of those is this tied to when you say the forecast?
Sure. Yeah, those were two separate analyses.
Yes.
So we have the intake reduction is separate analyses looking at the October 2015 forecast. So this does not assume any intake reduction. So this is the October forecast and then just subtracts the impact of expanding short-term trans-leave and doesn't assume any intake reduction.
If we took one of those more aggressive reduction moments and added it, this line would be out even further.
Exactly. Yes, it would be
Okay.
lower. Yeah.
Quite a bit.
Bob.
Maybe this is perfect world. So I was thinking, John, in regard to John's comment, I was thinking, what I'd like to know is, maybe this, like I say, is perfect world, but so let's say you have a 15% recidivism rate, whichever category it is. So I'd like to know the 85, who are the 85 non-recidivist? So the 15%, and they may not all have victims. They may be, a DUI. It's not specific victim related, but so one way I look at it is I go, well, those are, if they're in the community, there's victims. If they're not in the community, there's not victims. I mean, that's just that's a given. So that's one of the downsides, if you will, of somebody being out whenever they're out. But looking at the 85% that aren't recidivating, in an ideal world, it's like, well, so what is that group like? Because arguably, that would be, if they fit a particular profile, that would be the group we'd say, boy, if we could identify these people, we'd feel a lot better about moving their release time out farther because they've proven to be less likely to be creating new victims. If that makes sense. It's
So the thought would be just to clarify that we should look at the successful cases and try to study that group and see if we can determine characteristics that we might really hone in on even further, is kind of what you're suggesting?
Yes, I'm looking at it from my attorneys and the people we see in court, and having been in drug court, I look at people that go in our drug court. Many times I say, well, this person is going to flunk out, and then I'm at their graduation 2.5 years later, and they've made phenomenal success. And so that's not a particularly great predictor, but looking at, kind of looking at what they've done, or looking, why is this population better? What do they have that, somebody else with the same criminal history doesn't have? Why are they successful and somebody else? I know there's a lot of factors, so it's kind of but it does help inform, because it then lends to the argument that we're more confident this group isn't going to create more victims, which is the other side of the coin. And and there's obviously, if you flip the chart the other way and say the non-recidivist, you could sell it that way and say, well, gee, that's a pretty good population group that we want to focus on.
So, picking up on that and jumping, I guess, a little bit ahead to what was orally said we might be talking about before the end of the day is in terms of what are possibilities moving forward. This is, in a way, ties into what I'd been talking about. We haven't really been able to do it, but in the Multnomah County reentry program, I looked at that committee and said, look, we don't have a budget. We don't actually run programs, but we have a lot of people that are knowledgeable about the system in there, and was pushing sort of this concept of a failure analysis group, to have a group of people that you come to and say, let's look at programs. It kind of picks up on something that the Office of Public Defense Services has been doing quite successfully for almost 12 years, starting with Peter Ozanne and through the various follow-on, is that you have peer groups going in and looking at programs, the service delivery programs in each county, and trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work, and can we do that? And by doing that with peers, it has not had the weight of the full commission coming in, but it's allowed for a lot of tremendous reforms, and that might be the type of thing to get exactly what Bob is talking about moving forward. Is you have a body like what we have been doing, saying our mission is to look at programs and where there's been successes and where there's been failures, and are there lessons to be learned from the failures.
I want to remind us what was said at the very beginning of this conversation. A variety of the counties are just now coming online with some different support resources, some stabilization, some opportunities they haven't had. So over a period of time, as we look at that, it may even get easier to figure out what are the things that are making a positive difference versus not, as we look at some places that are all of a sudden have some opportunities they didn't have a year ago to address issues.
Other comments, questions? All right, just a check-in. We're just into our beginning of our second hour, and I know we have a few other presentations, so what else do we have?
So I was going to quickly demo the Oregon Knowledge Bank.
You going to do it from down there?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
So you guys do a lot of work with Jason coming out and all that sort
All
of
right.
stuff.
For the record, Mike Schmidt, Executive Director of the Criminal Justice Commission. Mr. Chair and members of the Public Safety Task Force, hopefully by now some of you have seen this. I know some of you have actually given us advice along the way and worked with us on getting this up, but I just wanted to take just 5 minutes to show you one of the things that this task force endorsed as a good use of the funding that we received from BJA through VERA for our Justice Reinvestment Grant. We're really excited about it. It's a CJC DPSST kind of joint project. We've worked together. You got a one-page handout in your packet of things, so take that home with you and take a look at it. But just quickly wanted to demo the site for you. It's a brand new resource that didn't previously exist in Oregon. We don't believe that anything quite like this exists in any other state. So we're really excited about it. When I've talked about it in some of my more national conferences, people are really excited about it. Around the state, people are really excited about it. So to give you just a quick overview, the idea behind it kind of came out of a lot of different ideas. Chief Teague, has talked about how do we get evidence to the people who are doing the work? How do we get them excited about the programs that are happening and that are working? When we were doing RICs around the state with the CJC, some of the things that community corrections directors asked me right away was like, well, what else are people doing? Where's the menu of programs that are happening? And so a lot of these conversations kind of coalesced in this idea of sharing information across the state. So we put together this website that has, it's very simple, and it just has 4 major areas: policing programs, correctional programs, research, and an agency directory. And these are all programs in Oregon. They're specific to what folks around the state are doing and how to address problems that and challenges that they're facing in their communities. So policing programs, if you went to the website, you clicked on this and say you're a law enforcement officer and you've got some sort of a whatever the issue is, if it's drugs or juvenile, I'll click on persons with mental illness. So you're an officer and you're like, how are other jurisdictions dealing with this? You could come to the website, click the tag persons with mental illness, and you'll see 3 programs pop up. So you're like, okay, well, let's, I want to hear about I've heard about court, but maybe learn a little bit more about it. Takes you right to the website, tells you who the contact person from Marion County is, and just gives you a very simple, high-level overview. What is the program? What's the problem that they were trying to solve? How did they try to solve it? A little bit about funding, and then what are the outcomes and what's their advice. So the thought is, and the hope is that you're a law enforcement officer and you're in a different community and you look at this, and it might just either inspire questions or ideas or give you someone to reach out to talk to who's faced these similar issues. It's from jurisdictions all over the state. We just launched it in December, and it's one of these resources that gets better with more use. I think of it a little bit like a Wikipedia. If no one ever contributed to that, it wouldn't be a very useful resource. The more people that contribute, the more programs that are submitted to this, the better it's going to be. So along with the law enforcement side and all those different issues, same kind of idea with the correctional programs. The layout is exactly the same, but kind of more focusing on the correction side of things. So let's say you wanted to talk about justice reinvestment. What are other counties doing for justice reinvestment? So you could go on here and you'll see what the justice reinvestment programs that they applied for are and what are they doing with these dollars. If you wanted to talk about victims, you could do that. So it's as good as we make it, and it's only going to get better, and we're trying to really get the word out. We're talking to associations around the state to let them know that this resource exists. Anytime we get invited to a meeting, so all of you represent associations and organizations, please reach out to us and invite us in. Either someone from CJC or DPSST can come and talk and kind of spread the word, because the more people that do it, the better it'll be. The research tab we're really excited about. It breaks down into two different ways of looking at research, Oregon and national. Now, national research is a lot of the resources that a lot of you have gone to all along. It's the different things you'd expect, and it's just all the links and a little bit of information about those, and it can get you to those resources. But what we really wanted to do is talk about what research has been done in Oregon. And so if you go on here, click on the Oregon tab, it's the exact same kind of layout. So let's say you wanted to talk about research done on speeding. There's a study on that. So effective police enforcement and roadway safety in Oregon. So here's a study that was done, 2014, and it's the same high-level analysis, right? This isn't the research paper. This is just gives you a taste of what it is and lets you know if this is something you should read more about and then similar posts. So maybe this isn't exactly what you were looking for, but for some reason, domestic violence research is similar to speeding. So you can click on that, and maybe there's a few bugs to sort out, but maybe it is similar. I don't know. So we're really excited about bringing Oregon research to people who are in the field and addressing these things to look at specifically what's been done here. And, of course, we're building on that, right? With our 3% that we've set aside in justice reinvestment, we're going to be coming out with more and more Oregon-specific research. The final major tab is the agency directory, where we're building out law enforcement agency profiles across the state. So you could click on one of these, and if you were in a similarly sized city, you could click on this and say, okay, well, I want to find out more about what their department looks like. If they have posted any programs, that'll show up right here. So they get kind of credit for their agency posting programs and posts. And then it tells you what their specialty units are. And so if you were interested and you were a similarly sized law enforcement entity and you wanted to set up a community resource unit, you could contact Lieutenant Lynn and say, hey, how'd you do that? What are the lessons you learned? But it's all about just bringing information to people and connecting all the work we're doing, because over and over and over, and you all have seen this, jurisdictions are facing similar problems, and they arrive at them with different amounts of resources and different population sizes, but a lot of the challenges are the same. And so hopefully this is just be a great way for them to be able to connect with each other and kind of ask and reach out for advice. Finally is the submit a program button. This is where somebody, if they were interested in submitting one of their programs, they could click on here. It's a fillable form. It goes to staff in the CJC. We, make sure it looks good and get it all set up, and then we get it up on the website. So we're really excited about this. The reception has been great. Every time that we've demoed this across the state so far, people are enthusiastic and excited about it. I think it really does kind of connect everybody, but we're just trying to get the word out. So it went live, like I said, in December. It's pretty much brand new. And so anyways, this is one of the 3194 programs that you all sanctioned, and we're very proud of.
Very nice. Questions? We're actually getting very high tech. John?
So I have a comment.
Above my
I think that I think this is going to would be a good proxy for to measure the success of, maybe not the success, to measure the degree to which police leadership in Oregon apprehends evidence-based practices in policing, specifically around problem-oriented policing. Because the degree to which this is used is the degree to which the police leadership changes the culture in their agencies, and this is my hobby horse. We know that evidence-based policing is most effective when it's practiced by people in agencies who have the authority, time, and resources to make it happen, and those are almost invariably middle managers. And it's the police executives and the middle management are still the sweet spot that we're not quite getting to in our 3194 efforts around Center of Policing Excellence. We just need to put more resources toward that. It will pay off in the long run. Again, I think this is going to be a good measurement, the degree to which this is used. Good enough. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mike, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so I think that brings us to our next presenters. Sarah, why don't you come on up? Sarah's going to be giving us the overview for the Justice Reinvestment Sustainability. I know that she's reached out to try to make contact with all of our members, and if you've had that opportunity to do that, thank you very much. If you haven't, I know that she would welcome you getting in contact with her, so she will be able to help facilitate her closure of putting a report together for us. So Sarah, when you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me again. So this will actually be my final visit to Oregon, kind of wrapping up our assistance here, which makes me a little sad. It's been a very great opportunity for me, and it's been nice working with everyone here. So kind of in the final stages, really wanted to kind of take a step back. I know there's a lot of immediate attention right now and kind of getting through this immediate phase of what everyone's been working on for the past few months, but thinking about taking a step back about how to sustain the things that are going well as you move forward into the years to come, and how to address some of the continued challenges that you face. Feel free to ask questions as I go. This can be an open discussion. You don't have to, save your questions till the end. You can interrupt me at any time. And also, I just want to note, when I talk about justice reinvestment in this context and in other states, it's the larger justice reinvestment framework. So it's all the work that was put into developing House Bill 3194, all of the goals of that bill. So I know in Oregon, a lot of times when we think about justice reinvestment, we think specifically about the grant program, but it's really kind of the full scope of the justice reinvestment efforts here. So here's just kind of an overview of the presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about the JRI model. Then I'll discuss key strategies for sustaining JRI reforms, and these are strategies that are taken on by JRI states across the country. Lessons learned from a few JRI states, and then we'll talk about specifically sustainability in Oregon, and then I'll get into a little bit of detail about the stakeholder outreach that I've been doing. So real quick, and it's always good to kind of go back to the basis of what Justice Reinvestment Initiative is. And the model is around a data-driven approach to reduce spending on corrections and then reinvesting those savings in evidence-based strategies. And here's kind of the components of the JRI model. And I'll say that number 6 and 7, as well as the internal circle, which is engaging stakeholders, is a component of sustainability. So let's talk about those key strategies. There are 4 main key strategies to thinking about sustaining JRI reforms. First one is maintaining consistent oversight and accountability, measuring performance and outcomes, continue reinvestment, maintain and improve stakeholder engagement and buy-in, and then there's a few other kind of additional strategies. So I'm going to get into what each of these mean. So maintaining consistent oversight and accountability. Currently in Oregon, the majority of the oversight and accountability is really within the body here, within the task force. Most states around the country have set up some sort of oversight entity in order to oversee implementation. It provides accountability for the people who are responsible for implementation. It helps ensure implementation is successful. It highlights successes. And just as importantly, it can help address challenges that are faced. And I think there's been a good example of that over the past few months. You guys have been engaged in these task force meetings for the past several years. And when there was a challenge that the state was faced with a few months ago, everyone kind of came to the table, was bought into the success of this happening, to look at what needs to be addressed in order to realize the goals. Measure performance and outcomes, again, tracking implementation of JRI reforms, again, highlighting successes and challenges. And again, the purpose of highlighting challenges is really to highlight areas where attention is needed, and then provides transparency and outcomes as well. Continued reinvestment, I know this is a big one. It helps expand the community capacity. If one of the goals is to reduce our reliance on prison beds while still savoring and improving public safety, a key way to do that is to expand the capacity in the community. And what that does is assist in providing alternative sentencing options. When people feel comfortable that people can be successfully managed in the community, they're more likely to use that as a sentencing option as opposed to a prison stay. And then this also engages state and local partners in the process. And here are some kind of just other additional strategies that people have done. One is about continuing implementation efforts. There's not a point in time where implementation ends and sustainability begins, right? Part of sustainability is continuing with implementation efforts, looking at what's working and how do we keep that going, but also looking at what's not working. Where do we need to address more attention that maybe attention's been given to other areas in the past? What do we need to direct our attention more in the future? Some places have developed a coordinated communication strategy, and I'll talk about that a little bit in one of my state examples. And then other places have also considered if additional reforms are needed. I will say the places that have used this the most are places that aren't seeing the results that they were hoping from the original bill. Sometimes that's because things aren't implemented fully. Sometimes it's because maybe there are additional reforms that are needed in order to realize those goals. So I'm going to give examples of two states, both South Dakota and Georgia are the two states that I'll focus on, some lessons learned. Now, I will say I do the same thing when it comes to Oregon as well. There are a lot of amazing things you guys are doing here that we share with other states, and this is kind of the opportunity to take some lessons from other states and bring them to Oregon. So a lot of what we do is sharing what's working. These states are at two different stages in their process, so you'll see their strategies a little different. South Dakota is about on the same timeline as Oregon. They passed their bill at the same year. Georgia is about a year ahead, so they're kind of a little bit more into sustainability. All right, South Dakota. Strong leadership from the governor's office. So this is really, both South Dakota and Georgia were successful in not only slowing the growth of their prison population, both states have reduced their prison population as part of their justice reinvestment reforms. And so in talking to people that have worked there, I really laid out the question, what has led to that success? And these are some of the answers that, knowing what Oregon is doing really well and what some of the struggles are, what I think would be most useful. So both South Dakota and Georgia, you'll see, has very strong leadership from the governor's office. And what that looks like is it's not just involvement of the governor's office, but it's high-ranking officials at the governor's office that are leading the efforts. They're the ones pulling people together when things aren't going well to talk about what the plan is to move forward. They're the ones highlighting the successes. Most of them are chairing or at least on the oversight entity. I think in Oregon specifically, CJC is playing the role of what a lot of other places the governor's office plays in staffing task forces and being the ones kind of pulling everyone together. They've had South Dakota's had particular statewide investment in evidence-based programming. They had a very directed approach. So in South Dakota, they determined that it was their substance abuse population that they wanted to focus on. They identified 2 specific evidence-based strategies, evidence-based programs that they wanted to roll out statewide, which is CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and MRT, moral recognition therapy. And they provided training both to state actors that provide this programming and community providers that provide this in order to train and make sure that this is implemented with fidelity. And then they focus on strengthening alternatives to sentencing options. And again, this kind of speaks to the second one. They saw this second piece as a way to provide additional sentencing options. They had a very interesting strategy to reach rural communities, and I think this would be interesting for Oregon as well. They found that in the rural communities, it didn't matter how much money you gave them, there just wasn't the providers in those communities to provide the services that are needed. So to expand their capacity wasn't just about additional funding. They had to get creative with how to really expand the capacity within that community. So they implemented a telehealth pilot. And the telehealth pilot, again, for them is focused on substance abuse programming, but it doesn't need to be limited to that. And it brings service providers in other areas and connects them with people who need those services in more rural communities where the providers aren't available. They participate in group treatment through this telehealth pilot. They also have a detailed focus on tracking performance, kind of reaching past sentencing changes. And 2 examples of that, they really track successful probation and parole completions. They have been able to not only reduce their prison population, which means more people are going onto probation and for them parole, for here be your version of post-prison supervision, as well as at the same time increasing the number of people who are successful on probation and parole. And they advertise this as a way to get people bought into this kind of being a new way of thinking. They use earned discharge to a very full extent. They see earned discharge as one of the ways they're able to get people their increase in successful probation and parole completions. They know earned discharge is one of the ways they've been able to do it. I want to pull up just some of their performance measures that they use, and I'll talk about this a little later on. Oregon, I think even more than other places, has really fine-tuned looking at the performance and the outcomes of the sentencing changes. Other states have taken more of a look at the non-sentencing change reforms that were put into place and tracking those. This is going a little slower than I'd like. So here are some examples of, let's say, earned discharge, some of the measures that they track and report on. So here's earning, the top one is earning efficiency. So what they do is they look at their eligible population of people who will be eligible for earned discharge versus who is actually earning it. So this gives them an idea of how many people are eligible that they're really capturing with this program. And then the bottom is the total days awarded. So they're really seeing how much earned discharge is being used by community corrections across the state. Let's see, here's another one. Here's an example of the implementation of drug courts and DUI courts, their treatment, their substance abuse and criminal thinking, the new admissions, and both completions of both of these things. So it's just kind of an expanded way of bringing on new measures outside of kind of just the sentencing reforms that are in their jurisdiction. Next, I will go to Georgia. Again, I talked about before, very strong leadership from the governor's office. The governor in Georgia sees justice reinvestment as one of their key pivotal things that they kind of want to go out on their resume as their tenure within the state. again, detailed focus on tracking performance. They also have a heavy focus on increasing successful probation and parole completions to show that putting people on community supervision can be successful for everyone. And then they've had an effective communication and media strategy. They have really taken their successes and worked within use the media as an outlet in order to advertise those successes, and that has helped provide a lot of statewide buy-in to what they are doing. And I have some examples of it. I won't just to get through the presentation, but if you're interested more in that, I could provide examples of what that looked like in Georgia. So let's talk about sustainability in Oregon. I'm going to kind of break this up into two parts. One is kind of successes to date. And the successes are not meant to be an exhaustive list. There are a lot of successes and good things happening here. These are kind of the highlights of what has been going well so far. And then kind of move into things that everyone could consider moving forward. So the successes to date, and I've already talked about the leadership of the task force, commitment of CJC. They really played a lead role in the coordination of efforts and execution of the Justice Reinvestment Funds. And I think CJC's role here is pretty unique compared to other states. And then there's been an investment in expanding community capacity through the Justice Reinvestment Program. Oh, I guess I skipped that. And then implementation of short-term transitional leave, which you guys have already heard a lot about. Very, like I said, very detailed measurement of the performance of the sentencing changes, implementation of the RICs. I know a lot of people have talked about the RICs as providing a place where you're bringing the information about what's working, what the performance is to the different counties, and provides an opportunity for the counties to engage with each other. And then strong collaboration across criminal justice system stakeholders at the state and local level. And this one is pretty unique. In a lot of other states that have been successful, particularly, a lot of the focus is on what's happening in community corrections. And in a lot of those states, community corrections are state-run. Now, that does not mean that one way of doing it is better than the other, but sometimes when things are state-run, it's a little bit easier to implement reforms statewide because you have more consistency. Because of the way community corrections is structured here, one of the benefits that have come out of this is the involvement, buy-in, participation, and people at the local level because of your structure, and I think that's been a really positive thing. And then promotion of successful strategies through the online knowledge bank. So next I'll move on to kind of thinking about going forward things to consider. It both includes how to continue with things that are going well and how to kind of address some of the challenges. Most of what's in here is based on conversations I've had with many of you, based on conversations and observations through the past few years, informed by what I know has worked in other jurisdictions. So this is not meant to be kind of Sarah from New York coming in and telling Oregon what it needs. This is really, a representative sample of what many people in Oregon have been thinking about, again, just informed by some additional things that I know has worked in other places. So I think one of the things that, should be considered is, we talked about, or it's been mentioned before, the task force is sunsetting as of now, January of next year. So the question is, does the task force continue? If it does it continue in its current form? If it doesn't continue, what is the other mechanism that will replace it, that will provide oversight and accountability? Based on what I know has worked on other places, there's a lot of ways to kind of reinvigorate an entity like this. It always happens, right, 2.5 years later, you're coming to the meetings all the time. A lot of these meetings have become very everybody reporting to you guys of what's happening. And I know there's a lot of interest in what's worked in other places is not just highlighting successes, but having real conversations about what the challenges are. And having, and some people think about turning something like this into more of kind of a working group or working discussion where your expertise can be shared with the people who are implementing these changes to really think through some of the ways that they're challenged. And so some ways to go about doing that. In South Dakota, they have every single agency that's responsible for implementing report at every meeting. And those reports are not just what's going well, but each of them has to bring to the table one thing that they're challenged with or one thing that's not going well. And what that could do is lead to a discussion amongst that agency with the task force members about how to address that issue. And then there's the accountability piece, which is then at the next meeting, that topic is back on the table for the agency to come and talk about what they've done since the last task force meeting, what concepts were discussed at the meeting that they're thinking about or implementing, how that's going, how that's not going. So those are just kind of some ways to think about if the task force wanted to continue, how to maybe reshape it going forward. I think every couple years when you have any sort of entity like this, it's good to kind of take a step back and rethink how maybe it could be restructured in order to provide, new energy into it. Governor's office playing a lead role in the oversight body. I know that the governor's office is not represented on the task force. And again, the governor's office has played a role. This is not to say that they have not. I know that they have played a role, especially in the past few months with the convening of the counties and everything. But them playing more of a leadership role in the oversight of justice reinvestment, high-ranking officials from a governor's office really being the one assisting with CJC to pull everyone together is something that could be considered. I would say expand system and performance measurement. Again, we talked about Oregon has done an amazing job with tracking the impact of sentencing changes as well as short-term trans leave, but really looking at what are the other components of House Bill 3194 where measures should be tracked to see how they are doing as well. And that will help do some of the next things that are included in here. In thinking about implementation, identifying policies in 3194 that have not been fully implemented and establish a plan to implement it. And these two things I'll bring up are just examples. They're not a full list of what might be included in that bigger theory. But here are two examples. One would be earned discharge. I know there were a lot of challenges with implementing it in the first year. Some legislative fixes went through in the legislative session last year. Those went into effect January of this year. So the question is, what needs to be done in order to fully roll this out? It's been interesting, I have to say, to see in Oregon. In other places, they've really taken a hold of earned discharge. They see it as a way to increase people being successful on community supervision. It provides a huge incentive for people to participate in their probation and post-prison supervision plans, which means the community's safer, which means they're more successful, which means less people go back to prison as a result. And so there's a lot of, but this is, earned discharge is one of those areas where it doesn't just implement itself. There's a lot of thought that needs to be put into implementing something like earned discharge. It's not just when people get to their 50% time, you tell them that they're eligible, they met the criteria, and they can get discharged, or they're not, they don't get approved, and you move on. It's telling people at the very beginning that they're eligible. This is what they need to do in order to get discharged at their eligibility date, checking in with them throughout to see how they're meeting that plan. So you're setting them up to be successful. I would say it's similar to kind of what DOC is doing with short-term transitional leave, and they've seen how positive it can be when you have this type of incentive to provide people. Also get into the reducing sentences for robbery and identity theft. I know part of the legislation was to reduce the presumptive sentence for, I think, probation in the third, or robbery in the third, and identity theft. But I think based on the numbers, not really seeing a reduction in the average sentence lengths for those two crimes. So, something needs to be looked into that to say why and how do we address that. Then I want to get into better understanding of eligible populations for certain policies compared with earned populations. So I think one example is the short-term transitional leave program. You could also throw earned discharge in there. We know how many people are, it's easier to track how many people are being released on short-term trans leave, how many people are earning earned discharge. The question is, how many people are eligible? Why is there that gap, and how to address it? That doesn't mean the goal is 100% right. It doesn't mean everyone that is statutorily eligible for short-term transitional leave should get it. Doesn't mean everyone that's statutorily eligible for earned discharge should get it. But it gives you an idea to see why people aren't earning it and if there's something that could help. There are examples of Oregon doing this, and I will take the transitional housing and short-term transitional leave. It was identified that some people were not necessarily getting approved because they didn't have appropriate housing, so there was a priority made for the JRI program dollars in order to provide transitional housing supports in order to address that. So that's an example of what looking at the eligible population versus the earned population can do to try to get more people earning what they're eligible for. And here might be a little bit of a new one. So exploring some unintended results and of some of the policies and identify ways to address it. One of the examples is downward departures and zero tolerance probation. So something that a few people have been talking about. It's not necessarily clear that this is a statewide issue. It may be something that's happening just in certain counties. But one of the things that's been brought to light is the new downward departure option for people with, for certain drug crimes. One of the things we're seeing is that when the courts will downward depart, they will downward depart to probation, but they'll say you go on probation, but they're going to enact kind of a zero tolerance probation or not allow the community corrections to do what they know works, which is using structured sanctions to respond to technical violations. So instead what they're doing is every time you violate, we want to see you, and they wind up sending the person, in some cases, back to prison. And especially for cases where it's substance abuse issues, first of all, most people are never perfect on community supervision, especially people where the root issue is substance abuse issues. The question is, how do you appropriately address those kind of hiccups in order to keep them on the path moving forward? So you address them, but you address them in the appropriate way. And so I think some people are seeing this downward departure but zero tolerance probation as just a delay in a prison sentence, because that's where they're going to wind up if they violate, which many of them will. And it looks like this is something that you guys are already thinking about, considering if new reforms or strategies are needed to realize the state's goals. You know, the projections that are done as part of developing House Bill 3194 policies, they're not perfect science, right? They're not, sometimes you realize them and sometimes you don't. And the question is, if you're not realizing them, one, what's not being implemented that should be? And two, maybe there's new reforms that are needed in order for the state to realize their goals. And I think one example is you guys are thinking about maybe expanding the short-term transitional leave program. Are there other reforms, new or expanding what's currently being used, that needs to be considered if the state really wants to meet its goals? And I'll throw this one out, identify ways to better engage the courts and district attorneys. You know, leadership from both the courts and district attorneys is something that I think Oregon could really benefit from. I know a lot of the kind of unintended consequences I talked about, some of the things that could be implemented a little bit more than they are things that are controlled at the courts level, or things that are controlled within the judiciary and within the district attorneys. So how to engage them in a more substantive way and have them kind of leading the efforts and implementing those things with their colleagues. And I can give lots of examples of how other places have done this, you know, at another time. So you'll hear more about the jurisdictional assessment at the next meeting, but essentially one of the things that BJA funds have gone to is implementing a jurisdictional assessment. And just as a reminder what that is, a jurisdictional assessment takes a jurisdiction. It looks at what the needs are of the population within that jurisdiction. It looks at what services you currently have available, and then it does an overlay to see, does that match up? Or are there more services you're providing in one area that really there's not the need in the community for that? Or are there needs in the community that your services are not meeting or not meeting to the extent that they need to? And so once this jurisdictional assessment is up and running to the fullest extent, this can really be used going forward to inform funding decisions with justice reinvestment programs, but also funding decisions by all the state funding that's going to local community corrections, some of the county money that's going to community corrections and others. How can we make sure that we're investing in the things that our community needs and not over-investing in things that they don't need? Explore other ways to strengthen services at the community level. I know a lot of the focus has been, and rightfully so, a lot of the focus has been on justice reinvestment programming dollars helping to expand capacity at the community level. But taking a step back and thinking about what are other ways to do this, and I'll highlight the South Dakota telehealth pilot as an example of kind of thinking outside of the box. What are creative ways to strengthen these services outside of just kind of additional funding? So that's kind of the bulk of kind of the additional things for Oregon to consider. I think it might be helpful for the task force to really think about if it wants to continue. If so, what does that look like? And think about maybe creating a sustainability plan based on some of the recommendations here, based on your thoughts about how to kind of sustain these things going forward. So I'm going to be providing kind of a memo that lays a lot of this out for everyone, so you have everything in writing. But I also wanted to make sure, and again, a lot of that information is based on discussions with many of you here, but I want to make sure that I'm hitting everybody, that everyone has the opportunity to kind of provide their input, and that it's updated, because a lot of this is based on kind of 2.5 years of conversation. So as was mentioned before, I'm doing some stakeholder outreach. I've reached out to everyone here. I think I have scheduled meetings, already had meetings with everyone here, as well as with ODAA and OACCD and OJD and others who are kind of responsible for implementation, Department of Corrections, to really kind of answer these questions. What do they see as the most successful components of JRI and House Bill 3194? What has led to that success? What do you see as the biggest challenges? Where is more work needed? And thinking about the future, what do they think is needed to realize and sustain its goals? What role do people see the task force playing? What role do they see themselves and their prospective organizations to play? And then keeping in mind the main components. Again, sustainability and oversight, performance measures, stakeholder engagement and buy-in. You know, what is Oregon currently doing that it needs to continue, and how does that continue, and what new things maybe need to be done in order for the state to realize its goals. So again, I'll be providing a final memo. It will not say like this stakeholder thinks this. It won't be kind of that detailed. It will be more of what are kind of the recommendations to the state of what should be considered, informed by these discussions that I'm having with stakeholders. And that is it. You've been very quiet. Does anyone have any questions about anything in the presentation or just thinking about moving forward?
Questions and comments? Oh, this is way too easy. Sarah, I want to thank you personally for all the work that you and Vera have brought to the state. I mean, this is one of those situations I think all of us at this table understand. Without the resources and the expertise, professionalism that Vera and you brought to us has really wouldn't give us, I think, the ability to do what we're doing. And I know it's probably easy for you to see how far we've moved as to comparing with other states. I think for us, it's remarkable today to see some of the plans and programs, some of the technical assets we now have available for us, and how to actually be looking at this issue and how do we sustain it, as you said, and really move forward with what we've done. So thank you very much, and please tell everyone back in New York and and Vera and wherever else they may be, that we really appreciate their participation, and we look forward to your final report.
Well, thank you. And I have to say, we're really excited about a lot of the things coming out of Oregon. I take every opportunity I can to kind of share that with the technical assistance providers that are working in states across the country. I had CJC present to everyone their online knowledge bank. You better be sure I'm going to be sharing the short-term transitional leave report that's coming out in the presentation. So I use Oregon as an example when talking to other states as well. So.
All right. Well, thank you. So this is the time for us to really open it up for additional discussions as to things that we want to do. We've had great presentations today, and I guess I will start off that I expect that we will continue to have our meetings. We do have a deadline, and since of our sunset is set for next January, and we have a report in the fall that needs to come forward. And I know that Sarah, like I said, has reached out, and I know some of us have had an opportunity to meet with her, and some are going to be meeting today and tomorrow. And if you aren't able to get on that, I assume by phone, if necessary, she can get your comments, because I think it's really important for all of us from our own individual perspectives to give her that information so she can work that into the report. And looking at how and we as a state going to take and capture what we've gotten, the resources that have been given to us and presented us with the opportunity of how we can get better outcomes and being efficient, holding people accountable, but at the same time getting, I think, a better result for the citizens of the state. So,
Floyd?
Andy.
Yeah, this is Andy. Yeah, I agree with you. I haven't really had a lot of discussion with the other members on this committee, on this task force, but I really do believe that we need to move forward with continuing this task force. Sarah has really pointed out and done a great job in sharing some of the neat things that we've done over the last few years. You get it as well as I do, where we have come from over the last number of years to get to where we're at today. It would be kind of sad if we just walked away from everything, especially what she's identified and what all the others did today as well. I mean, I most definitely am in favor of continuing the task force and bringing that to our colleagues to move that forward.
That's great. Scott.
I agree. I think the task force ought to continue, and I just want to use a moment here in comment time. I am really struck at the local level, all this dialogue about whether we were going to have to cut, whether the funding, and I don't think that's going to go away. I think it's going to continue to be a back pressure, and it really shakes the confidence of people being able to invest strongly and aggressively in moving forward with this. And after looking at the charts, I'm very buoyed by what the different counties are starting to do and the forecast. And by listening to all the only thing everybody's agreeing on is criminal justice reform needs to be looked at. So it seems like an ideal time to have a serious conversation about adjusting that short-term transitional leave, even if it's just to 120 days or in a 2-year temporary or whatever, so that we are more and more guaranteed that the number will stay below, because with all respect to DOC, having worked there for a long time myself, once we open that door, the giant sucking sound begins. And sucking of money. And I would really, I would really like to see us reduce that opportunity, and then later the ability to invest in some of the programming that goes on inside to connect better. But I'm just afraid we're going to blow right through this, we're going to miss it, and then in June something will happen and we'll all say, and when you start talking to local about we're going to have to cut and take some of that back, all of the momentum and investment feels shaky. So I really, with the information and the evidence, I really hope there's some consideration for an addition to that line being below.
Sounds great. Jay, anything?
No, I agree with what Scott is saying.
I would say I think that's another thing for all of us to be looking at. I think hopefully for maybe our next meeting or within the next two, that we will do some of the strategy as a task force of what we want to be moving forward as to the report that we'll be giving to the legislature as a whole, emphasizing these points that have been brought up and the necessity for that certainty for the counties to be able to continue to invest. I think the preliminary numbers that we have show and demonstrate we should be doing this, and we'd be foolish not to want to continue it. And three, I guess, to have the confidence that at the local level that what you're doing has worked, and that we're going to ensure that the funding is going to stay there so you can expand to the next levels, because clearly it's going to be, I feel, that the locals really pushing us at the state level to understand why this transition is so important. And so by showing these in demonstrations of how it's actually impacting public safety, accountability, and we're getting better results, and as everyone says, it's kind of like that local control. At the local level, you are able, with the resources you have, to really probably accommodate somebody better than in a centralized value type process.
And with the crisis we're facing at the women's population, it seems like an ideal, even if it's that targeted in your discussions. There are some programs we're kicking off that we could easily accommodate because the women's population is so much smaller to work with, and their pathways are so different.
Wow. Just from a comment perspective, and this has been mentioned before, but to me, the value and the work of the CJC is extraordinarily helpful. One of the things Sarah mentioned is about the involvement of the district attorneys, the courts, and I can't speak obviously as a representative of the courts, but I can as a 41-year practicing attorney in the courts. And I know that at confidence and raising questions, well, if this is just about numbers, what does that, how does that help us? If you're sending less people, how does that impact this and that? But the ability and through DOC, together to respond to ask questions and get a response. How does this impact our local jails and so forth? Is all really helpful in those conversations we have when we go from here in terms of, well, what about this and what about that? And it, to me, as we move along, that's part of the sustainability, as I view it, is establishing confidence, seeing what works, and so then people are more confident, at the implementation stage of what we can do and what we can't do. There'll always be, it's an adversarial process. There will always be some disagreements and philosophical differences about something, but the information we're getting is golden to me, because I can then take it to my lawyers, I can give it to the judges, I can take it to my fellows and point out and let them look at it and come back with their critiques or questions. I just can't understate that enough from what I've seen in the past and so forth. It really it helps, and it will help in the sustainability. And I think, this group and these presentations kind of radiates from there.
Yeah, no doubt. Anyone else? Well, thanks to all the members who were able to make it. Andy, thank you for participating. I know that you would have been here if you could have, but it's great to have you on the phone. And with that,
thank you.
I think we're adjourned for today, and for the everyone else, we'll see the legislature back here on Monday. Beware.
And the blue light does not mean we're not being recorded.
We're still on the record.
There's a red light.
Russ Caldwell at the